the Roots of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. Now, if you're new here, thank you so much for tuning into the show, and I sure hope you'll stay. So make sure that you subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever else you listen to your podcast. Now, to my regulars, oh man, I love you guys so much. So thank you once again for tuning in. A reminder that you can also follow this podcast on all major social media platforms. So on Instagram and Twitter at Root of the Sci Pod, or on Facebook, we have a Facebook group called the Root of the Science Podcast. Now, let's get into today's episode. My guest today is Kaylan Reddy, a PhD candidate in botany from South Africa. In this episode, we learned that he is the first scientist in his family and attributes the roots of his science to them, who support his weird and wonderful science facts from a very young age. Kaylan explains that initially he majored in biochemistry and chemistry, which is how his undergraduate journey started. He then combined the chemistry to plants, pursuing a degree in medicinal plant sciences. After, Kaylan went to pursue a master's degree, which was upgraded to a PhD program. Now, Kaylan is going to explain what this all means for you, so tune in. He is currently busy with this, and he explains his research. His current research is researching a traditional medicinal plant used by the Khoí and Sān people in South Africa that could help with anxiety and depression. Kaylan explains to us more about this very important research and its very real life applications. As wonderful as Kaylan's academic journey has been, we also discuss some of the challenges that he's had to experience and how he has overcome this. Tune in as we hear about all of this and, of course, so much more. Let's go. Hi, Kaylan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be on the show. Really excited to have this conversation.
Same. I'm so excited to chat with you today. So now, before we get things started, it's always best for you to give us a brief introduction. Who is Kaylan? Where are you from? Where are you currently based? And just briefly, what are you currently doing?
Right. My name is Kaylan Reddy. I'm 24 years old, born and raised in South Africa, Pretoria, in Gauteng. And then I moved to Stellenbosch in the Western Cape to pursue my master's. Actually my PhD now, and I'm doing my PhD in botany.
Oh, fantastic. So we're obviously going to get into all of that later in the show. But before we get into your science and everything that you do, I think it's really important for us to sort of get to know you away from the science. And I love how you said that away from the science, if you're not out in the field, doing everything that you do, you actually enjoy like art and many forms of art. Currently, you are dabbling in like water painting and clay sculptures, which is absolutely cool. Can you tell us some more about that side of you?
Yeah, I really, really love art, both appreciating it and doing it. And one of my passions right now is water painting and clay sculptures. What I like about it is that you don't have to be too analytical about it. It's a little bit of an escape from the traditional science. So I just play around with it. I start on a piece of paper with different strokes, with different colors. I don't try to paint anything initially. And then once I start to see a picture there, I'll start going, if it's a face or a tree or a mountain, I'll just go with the flow with it. And that's what I really like about it. It's somewhat unpredictable. And then with the clay art that I do, I just make like small clay frogs or fridge magnets. It's just something small that I enjoy doing.
Oh, that's so cute. That's so cute. And I love how you said that it's sort of like an escape, because I think with science, it's very rigid. It's very like things, it's a procedure or protocol or whatever. So I think the beauty of like art is, like you said, it's expressive. Like, and I love how you said that even when you start, you don't even know what you're going to do at the end, which is quite refreshing, right?
It's amazing. I love not having to, just every now and then, not having to go through the scientific method. It's nice.
Yeah, and I think even the brain is like, oh, thank God. No,
Yeah.
that's really great. I love that you have that artistic side, and it's beautiful that both the right brain and the left brain get to work. I don't know which side is the creative side and which side is the artistic. I mean, there's a creative side, and then there's that, what is that
Yeah.
side, the numbers,
The analytical.
yeah, the analytical side. I never know exactly which one is which, but I'm sure I love that the fact that for you both of them get to be expressed and they get to work, which is quite beautiful. With that being said, have you always been in art? Is it something that you developed on the side now? Or is it something that you've always been doing?
I've always been doing art. If it's not necessarily in the form of painting, if
Mhm.
it's in drawing or photography, that's also something that my family nurtured in both myself and my sister. Being expressive, having some kind of outlet. It's always been a privilege to have that growing up.
Okay, fantastic. And speaking of your family and you growing up, I think then it just gets us to the genesis. How did you get into the sciences? I mean, was it something that you always away apart from just the artistic side, which you said that your parents supported when you were younger? Was this the science always been something that you always wanted to do, or is this one of those things where it's sort of just like, you know what, I'm here, let's do it. So, what is the root of your science?
So the root of my science is, I'm the first scientist in my family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my sister is also pursuing a PhD in education. So aside from us, we were really the first to kind of get into this space. And, if I think back to what is the root of the science for me, it goes back to my family, my mother, my father, and my sister, who supported and listened to all my weird and wonderful science facts that I'd bring home. And I'd get, even today, I get carried away with certain anecdotes in science, and my friends support me as well. Yeah, my family never made me feel like anything was out of reach. So science has always been my passion and something that I wanted to pursue. Other than that, like thinking back to something specific that made me feel that science was within my reach is a book
Mm-hmm.
called First Words for South African Kids. And in that book, there was a character, an Indian character named Abdul, who on one page appeared in a lab coat. And through most of my childhood, that was the only representation I saw for me.
Wow.
So, that was something that was quite instrumental in me feeling like, oh, okay, even though it's just in a book, it's possible.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Sorry, to cut you off, but I love that, and I think you've brought on such an important aspect, which will always seem like a recurring tone on this podcast. But it's the issue of like
Yeah.
visibility in terms of like growing up. It was very hard to see people of
Yeah.
color. Well, not very hard. It was almost never where you saw people of color represented in books or magazines. So it's important that for you, I like that image of that book and that little
Yeah.
boy who looked like you're like, oh my goodness, yes, okay, this is something this is something that I want to do. Okay, so then you have your family who supports you, who listens to your cool science jokes, and they're like, okay, Kaylan, this is cool. So how do you then get into like botany? Is like, how, let's say now we fast forward a little bit after
Yeah.
school. When do you decide like, okay, this is what I want to do, botany? Is this something that you started with from undergrad, or, take us through that academic
Okay.
journey?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I would have never expected that I'd be in the field of botany. In the first year, I did not like plants. I even went home and I told my sister, I will not end up with plants because I struggled conceptually. It was just not easy for my brain to wrap around it. I went
Yeah.
into university wanting to understand what made people the way they were, but at a chemical level. So I wanted to study biochemistry and chemistry.
Okay.
And that's the route I took in undergrad. I did the major in biochem and chem at UP. And then I decided to study, because I was interested in how can we manipulate this chemistry towards the end of my studies. And you could go two ways. You could go the synthetic route, one compound in a drug, how does that affect people? Or you could go the natural products route. And I decided to go natural products, and I studied medicinal plant science also at UP. And then from there, moved to Stellenbosch to pursue my master's. And we gathered enough data, and the project developed at quite a fast rate. So we were able to upgrade it. And now I'm currently doing my PhD in botany.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's pretty amazing. So this is very like, I like this, how this detour sort of happened. So I'm going to just take us back because you're like, no, I am not doing plant sciences. And look at you now. Like, I'm sure like Kaylan and Frisk will be like, excuse me, that was not the plan.
But I love where I am now. And I have a newfound appreciation for plants.
Definitely. Okay, so in terms of your journey, you did it in undergrad, the biochemistry part, and then you said for your master's, it was a 4-year degree, I'm assuming.
No, my undergrad honors was 1 year.
Oh, okay. So you did an honors still in biochemistry or botany? Because you said that you jumped from master's.
So I did an honors in plant science, specifically medicinal plant science.
Oh, okay.
And then I moved to Stellenbosch to do my master's in botany. But it was upgraded to a PhD.
That's okay. We're going to get into that. That's pretty fantastic. Okay. So in terms of your journey, it sounds like it was pretty straightforward, just like from the sounds of you explaining it right now. But I know that wasn't the case, and I think with many people who are on postgrad, the journey is not always like straight and narrow to get to your PhD level. So if you don't mind sharing, can you just talk us through some of the challenges that you might have had to face to get where you are? Because somebody looking at you now could be like, oh my goodness, he just moved from master's to PhD like so quickly, or even from undergrad. So what were some of the challenges that you faced, and how did that sort of help to get you where you are right now?
I'm more than happy to share the challenges, because too often those get omitted, and it seems like people are doing it effortlessly. Like it came with its own challenges and hurdles along the way. Starting from my undergraduate studies, I loved chemistry. Like it was my life. I had playing cards of the periodic table. Like it had consumed me, but I wasn't good at executing it in university. And my first year was also when Fees Must Fall was happening. So I missed a large portion of, classes. So I wasn't great at self-studying chemistry. And as a result, failed chemistry in first year. But, the University of Pretoria had an option to do a summer school. So it's like your last opportunity in the December holidays to pass chemistry. Managed to pass it. And my family tried, talking to me, saying, maybe you should change your major. Maybe chemistry is not for you. But I'm stubborn and I still loved chemistry. So I stuck with it for another 2 years.
Oh my,
and managed to pass the undergrad. But aside from that, then I was faced with a personal, challenge in my life, which was the passing of my mother in my final year from cancer. So that was really difficult to focus, to even find, focus and drive to go through your final year. But through the support of my family and my soon-to-be honors supervisor back then, he had no obligation to support me and emotionally, and he really, really stepped up and was an amazing mentor and support system. And through that, I managed to pass my undergraduate. I did my honors with him because we had developed quite a strong relationship between a supervisor and a student, which motivated me as well. And once I finished my honors, I was faced with the decision to leave home. And that was quite scary and very big for me, because I had no friends and no family here in the Western Cape. So it was a big move for me. And, through all of that, like through the 2 years of doing the masters, or the 18 months, everything was happening so fast. I had very poor boundaries between personal life and professional life. A lot of it was consumed by the masters, which, I wouldn't advise that to students maybe going through this process. But through that, managed to get to the PhD. And now I'm trying to put it into practice, like having more clear boundaries between work and personal life, and taking the time to appreciate the postgraduate experience, you know?
Wow, Kaylan. Oh my goodness. First of all, can I just say I'm so proud of you for how far you've come. Like just hearing the story, it gave me goosebumps. And I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability in sharing this, because I think sometimes when you are at that specific level, because I mean, academically, you are at the pinnacle, like academically, you know, you are at the top. You can't really get higher than that unless you become like a professor or something. I'm not saying that you won't, but like you've reached the status, and with that, people who look up to you just might just be like, oh my goodness, wow, you know, he just got there. But the fact that you are like, listen, you know, in all of this stuff, a lot of life happens simultaneously.
Yeah.
And a lot of failures happen simultaneously. And I also like how you said that you're a bit stubborn and you're like, this is what I want to do. But like, even though it wasn't for you, the chemistry, but you still tried to like fight it until eventually you're like, okay, you know what, maybe this is not for me. And I think maybe somebody who's listening is also going through that, because when you're obviously younger, you have this picture of where you view yourself to be or what you think you're going to be. But sometimes, you know, life has a funny way of not going the way that you plan. And I like how you sort of took the time and you're like, okay, fine. This is not for me. Let me try something. And look at you now, you're excelling. And also just my condolences about your mom as well. That must have been, oh, wow. I can't even begin to imagine. So yeah, like I said, I'm really proud of you. And I love how there is like a success story at the end of this when you become doctor ready, and you know, somebody people can be yeah, it's coming. It's coming. So back to your research now, because we now fully understand. And I think now as everybody we can really have the pleasure of really understanding why this is so important and why you do what you do, given how far you've come in your journey. So you did say that you are a PhD student in botany at Stellenbosch University in the Western Cape. Your research involves investigating the chemistry and genetics of African traditional medicine, right? You're going to get into tell us the names because I don't want to butcher them. So can you just give us a brief overview on exactly what you're doing and why is it so important?
Yeah, so I'm looking at an African traditional medicine known as Sceletium. It also goes by the names of Kougoed or Kanna. And traditionally, Sceletium was used as a hunger and a thirst suppressant by the Khoí and Sān people of South Africa when they went on long journeys, long hunting journeys as well. But it was also recreationally used as a mood elevator by the Khoí and the Sān. So research and pharmacology started to get quite interested in this mood elevation activity, specifically to assist with anxiety and depression. So currently, there's one species that's being commercialized and turned into a drug, or has been turned into a drug, to help with anxiety and depression, and that's Sceletium tortuosum. However, there are 7 different other species in the Sceletium genus. And that's what my research is trying to look at. It's looking at the 8 species in the genus of Sceletium to uncover if maybe this mood elevation activity is shared by close relatives in this genus. And so in my research, I travel around the Western Cape, the Eastern Cape, and the Northern Cape in search of populations of Sceletium. And once I find them, I look at their genetics to see, you know, what species is it, how close is it related, and I also look at its medicinal chemistry. So does it have those chemicals that are going to assist with anxiety and depression? And I'm able to, you know, make some of these predictions using something called computational biology. And that's where we can predict how these compounds will interact with different parts of the brain with highly detailed simulations on our computers. And yeah, this research, it's vitally important. And why I say this is the race for new medicines to assist with mental health, it's forever ongoing. People who suffer from mental health disorders often have to take medication for prolonged periods of time, and they either build a tolerance to the drugs or some medications just don't work for them. So that's why looking at medicinal plants and traditionally used plants to elevate one's mood is a really good source of new drugs to help with mental health.
Wow, this is so fascinating. And I'm like, what? This is really cool. And you're right, it's absolutely so important. I mean, in this day and age, we've seen how many people are suffering, and they are suffering in silence due to all of these mental health disorders. And the fact that there is this indigenous knowledge of where, these indigenous plants are actually out there, and they could potentially have the potential to, to help with that in terms of the whole drug development is absolutely fascinating. And I think it just goes back to show that some of these things are right here, right, dare I say, in our backyard. And it's important that there are people like you who are driving all over South Africa just in search for that, which is really, really cool. You said that there are 8 species, right? So far, in terms of your findings, are you seeing that there are some similarities, be it genetically or in terms of the chemical, or rather the chemistry, in terms of the most common one and the ones that you are currently working with? Or is that still like to be known?
So in terms of the genetics, that's still to be found out, and that's going to be my priority going forward in this year. But in terms of the chemistry, very exciting news is that we are seeing shared chemistry between the plant that's commercialized and a few of the other species in the genus. So, this is starting to tell a story. We can't say it as a fact because we're still researching this. But there's potential that other plants in the genus may hold this mood elevation activity as well.
Wow, this is so, so cool. And also, I mean, if you look at it now, remember, you mentioned that you did a biochemistry in your undergrad. Isn't this sort of linking with that now, like all these years later, even though it's not directly what you're doing? Isn't this something sort of similar in terms of the biochemistry aspect of it?
Absolutely. If the way I've seen my academic process, it's just every day you might wear a different hat. One day we're doing a lot of molecular biology. The next day we're doing a lot of chemistry. The next day we're doing a lot of biochemistry. Going through the process of, studying, it didn't make sense, but now everything is starting to line up, and every skill I've learned serves me in some way. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I think this just goes to show that some of these courses that we do at undergraduate level, like you said, at that moment, maybe might not make sense. But like later on, you're like, oh my goodness, the statistics that I took actually is being used here. Or so these people actually know what they're doing when they are like putting together a course, which is fantastic. Kaylan, you mentioned something also in the beginning when you were introducing your research. You said that you upgraded your master's to a PhD, right? So now for somebody who's like, what on earth does that mean? What on earth does that mean? Can you explain to us? Because it's really cool. So what does that mean when you upgrade your master's to a PhD?
So what exactly upgrading your master's to a PhD means is you initially registered for a master's degree. Then after 18 months of doing your master's, that's the cutoff date for when you're allowed to apply for an upgrade. And it only happens, sometimes you may get it by invitation, other times you can approach the faculty for an upgrade. It depends on university to university. And from that point, what happens is you present your research that you've done up until this point, and you must basically tell the story that I've completed my master's and I have research that's novel, and I'm working on publications, so that you're basically telling them all I need is an additional year, and what I've done will be equivalent to a PhD. Then they just add an additional year to the 2 years you've gone through, and you're then registered for a PhD. So I won't have a master's degree. It will be undergraduate honors PhD.
Wow, that's pretty impressive though, hey? I mean, for somebody,
it was quite hectic.
I mean, of course, yes, behind the scenes, it's a lot. But I'm just saying, like, in terms of how you explained it, that this, like, we aren't just saying, oh, this is exciting. It really is exciting for them to be like, okay, you know what, this is actually PhD worthy, so wow, kudos to you for that. That's really exciting. That's really exciting. So with the work that you're doing and traveling around, I'm curious, what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated? What's the reason that you keep waking up every morning and trying again with this PhD? What is that one thing that just makes it make sense for you?
Initially I wish that I started like the postgraduate studies like insanely motivated and knowing exactly what's waking me up in the morning. It took me time to find that, and honestly now I know what it is, and it's to tell a story. If I can wake up every day and tell a story either through my science or as a result of the science, that's really what motivates me. And the best part of waking up and doing this kind of research is seeing science in context. So, when I look at say, for example, the plant's chemistry, and I see it producing a ton of these compounds that are going to help with anxiety and depression, like understanding where the plant grew, because having the privilege to travel out there, I get to see that the plant was extremely stressed or attacked by herbivores or growing in a really, really bright and hot environment. And I get to understand on that level what's influencing the chemistry. So science in context and talking to the people who use the plants, like it really, really motivates me.
Oh, yes. I love that answer. I love that answer because even for me, I think the more I've been doing my science and realizing that science is not just for scientists, it's, we need to contextualize it more and understanding, like what you said, the story, the beginning, the middle. So the beginning is like where, like you said, where this plant, the origin, right? And then the middle is you actually doing all of this research. And I think the end story is that what happens to it in the end product. And I think if we look at science like that, not just like numbers and figures, which which we are programmed to think, it just makes a lot more sense. And I think you are able to find that purpose more, because sometimes just thinking of it as like journal articles and stuff, it gets a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
It gets a little bit
that.
It gets a little bit overwhelming. Kaylan, you know what? It's been lovely chatting with you and you just sharing your story and everything, and you teaching us about what you're doing. So as we wrap up, with somebody who's listened to your journey and everything that you've done, what are some golden nuggets that you'd like to share, be it in terms of the science or just in life in general, everything that you've learned so far in terms of where you are and where you aspire to be?
Okay, so some general pieces of advice or reflections that I found through the process is, network as much as possible, no matter what level you're at. If you're at first year and you're worried that, postgraduates or lecturers might not give you a certain level of respect, like, don't even think about that. Just go and network. If you want exposure in a lab, ask. The worst they can say is no. And that's another thing I would suggest to someone who wants to develop themselves, not just for research, but if you're going out into industry, get as much lab exposure as possible. In my undergraduate, I knew that they wouldn't put me into a lab because I wasn't trained yet. So I offered to clean for some of the postgraduates, prepare solutions, that kind of thing. And from that step, you can network with the people in the lab, and then they'll want to train you in any case. So that's another suggestion I have. Talk to academics, take the risk and just ask for it. And then also don't be afraid to fail. Like, once you talk to a lot of researchers at this level and just in postgraduate studies, you're going to see that most of us eat failure for 3 meals a day. Like, it's natural to fail. And the positive side of it is we learn. It sucks at the moment, but you learn from it. So don't be afraid to fail.
Oh man, Kaylan, that's fantastic advice. Yeah, we eat failure, guys. Like, the higher you get, the more servings of failure you get. I think I've learned that. It's the spoons get bigger and bigger, but I think you learn to be able to swallow them and chew it faster.
Yes.
So yeah. Oh, and also I love what you said about networking. And I'm also a big believer of just putting yourself out there, and also just the whole idea idea of that. The worst that anybody can say is no. And
Yes.
just be exactly where you were. So it doesn't really change anything on your part. But I've noticed, be it with people who you admire, who are even like on Twitter or something, you can or I don't know where else, you can send an email. In most cases, they'll either say yes or say not right now, or refer you to somebody else before they hit you with a flat out no. So I love that. Network. And yeah, those are such amazing advice. Oh my goodness, Kaylan, I had such a fantastic time chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a big pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. And to everybody else who's listening, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. Until next time, goodbye.